Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, March 24th, 2023. Next year at this time it will, of course, be 3/23/23 Eastern Orthodox style. So remind me 2 days beforehand to get ready for that. I don't know. I was hoping we wouldn't have to go there. But hey, a little disorganized this morning, and we'll see how the show goes. I think we have the quietest workmen I've ever encountered working next door. I would ask them to wait until after the show if we were scheduling them. But next door, I think the other day I made mention of the fact that they were putting up a new fence next door, and I was worried about the noise during the show, and they were extremely quiet. I can't believe that they actually finished it up. But the project looked to be, I guess, it was only a partial replacement. So I sort of rationalized it that way. Today, they appear to be taking up the surface of the deck next door. I don't know whether they're rebuilding the whole thing from the ground up, but starting by demolishing it from the top down, or whether they're just replacing the top deck, maybe with something, some just rotted boards, or putting down some nice Trex decking. Trex can cut me a check for the commercial after this. And at any rate, they're the most careful, quiet workmen I've ever encountered, so I'm grateful to them for keeping the noise down. We'll hope that remains the case throughout the show. I mean, really careful. They're prying up these boards and then carrying them down on their shoulders down the steps to the ground level, as opposed to, most other workers, I think, would just toss the boards over to save time, and there'd be clattering and all sorts of noise, but they're being very considerate. I should hire them to do the job at our place. And let's build a studio, a soundproof studio, while we're at it. Sure, why not? Okay. Well, at any rate, it is Thursday, and tomorrow we will be unable to bring you a live show as we take off on the first of the college campus visit trips for the high school junior. That's good news, / bad news. We'll see how it goes. Should be an interesting one this weekend. And let's see, plenty of stories to catch up on. Lots to sample from. All of our major global crises still going on. Fourth day, I think, of hearings for Judge Jackson. Last day of the ordeal, I hope, for her over in the committee. We'll see whether anybody is able to top the depths to which they sank on the Republican side yesterday. I guess sink deeper would be the better description of it. And we'll have an eye on that. Greg will be here with his raft of stories already being prepared. And Bill already arrived with his morning tweet. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Hey, addressing me directly. Hey, Kagro X, FYI, today is Chocolate-Covered Raisin Day. Excellent. One of my favorites. Not using the brand name of Raisinets for that. All sorts of good and better than that chocolate-covered raisins out there. But let's see, Bill says, I originally read it as Chocolate-Covered Russian Day, which is a much different prospect. My God, what a waste of chocolate that would be. And, but they are delivering door-to-door in Ukraine, so that's good news. Anyway, it's actually bad news. And I didn't realize there was a Chocolate-Covered Raisin Day. I guess you don't have to be, I guess you just, if you have a new PR person and they have a connection for national days, they just get you a national day. Like, you don't have to be a downtrodden, I don't know what, or something that needs to raise awareness or anything like that. There's all sorts of things about which we're already aware. Pancake Day, Pizza Day, National Chocolate-Covered Raisin Day. Is there a regular Raisin Day? California Raisin Day? Nothing like that? I don't know. There should be some standards for getting yourself a day, but it's a good excuse to eat a nice snack, I guess. Go out and get some of those things. That could be a total lie, too, by the way. I haven't checked that at all. I'll try the Google machine while Greg introduces us to the various calamities that are happening here and abroad. How are you doing,
right. Well,
Greg?
Don't forget, it's also Cheese Month and Bacon Year.
Is that the
every day's bacon?
The lunar calendar New Year?
Yeah. Well,
you're the pig, but the dead one with bacon.
bacon.
Right.
Bacon.
It's pretty good. I don't think I could last a year on bacon, though.
Today is not
Ah, bless you.
the last day of the ordeal
No?
for the newest justice for the Supreme Court, because basically today is testimonials and witnesses.
Oh, okay. So
she's
nice
pretty
stuff.
much done with the questioning. There may
That's
be a
good.
few more questions, but it's mostly done.
Oh, yes. Well, they'll still just yell at her for being, on the wrong side politically.
Oh, yeah. Basically they spent the entire time yelling at her for being a black woman. So
Yes.
that's not going to change.
Right. Well, yeah. You didn't even have to be on there. Would they do? I guess they could do that to somebody who's from their own side. But curiously, they find a way to get around it.
Yeah, there were a lot of low moments yesterday. I'm certainly not going to cover most of them. Just suffice to say that white Christian resentment was heavily advertised. And if anybody didn't think the Republican Party was white Christian nationalist and racist, you had everything to see. I saw some
That's
folks
something
complaining
chocolate cover.
because Josh Barro, for example, said, what is everybody complaining about? Democrats have this locked up, and the important thing is that she gets confirmed. And, the other side to that argument is, yes, but these hearings are very visible, and Democrats ought to use it to be defending her.
Oh. Yes, that's another complaint. I mean, I
Well,
just
but,
complain 'cause Josh
all of
Barro
that ignores
is
the fact that Republicans
talking.
are just laying out what's wrong with them for everybody to see.
That's
And
true,
there's
too.
not much Democrats have to do. Republicans just did it all for them.
That's one
That
view
doesn't
of it,
move
I
you,
guess.
Then Democrats defending her isn't going to move you,
That's true. But it was an opportunity to yell at Republicans.
which is always fun, but
People
not
do like
necessarily the thing that gets stuff done.
Yeah, and it may be that the advice of the professionals for whom the bottom line is making sure that there is a confirmation. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it would affect anything either way, but I wouldn't doubt that the professionals are saying, "Oh no, it will. It'll actually make it less likely that she'll be confirmed or make her less popular if we fire back." That sounds like the sort of thing a consultant might say, and they might even be right. I don't know.
I don't know whether they would say it. I don't know if it's right. I do know
Let's just
that you don't
say
need
that they would,
Democrats
and their name is
saying,
Joe.
hey, you guys are racist, when in fact what you're doing is demonstrating you guys are racist.
Yes, well, that's certainly. Well, there was no stopping that. That you're just going to have to say, all right, well, we'll just turn the cameras on and document it.
So two of the best moments, in fact, came from Ben Sass.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he says to the judge, Brown Jackson, what judge would you mold yourself on? And she says, I don't have to mold myself on a judge. I am a judge.
Okay. Well, sure, that's true, but
Right?
all right.
Look, I am credentialed. I have a perfectly valid and good reason for being here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to compare myself to anybody else. They should be comparing themselves to me.
Well, all right, that's a healthy attitude after all that abuse. Jeez. All right. Good question.
I once went to a wonderful concert from a very famous jazz singer who will remain unnamed,
How am I going to model myself?
who told the
on him?
story of growing up in Brooklyn
That's
and
why I liked him.
actually going to Erasmus High School
Aha.
and being in the choir.
All right, now I got enough clues to figure this out. Go on.
All right, and she had just a wonderful voice.
All right.
And she
I'm
said,
Googling
choir
now.
drove me nuts.
Choir.
Because they kept telling me to sing it this way, and I wanted to do what I want to do, she said.
Yeah, I have that problem in my house, except I don't think he's destined for a jazz career. But okay.
Right. But, so the idea, look, sometimes you just have to go out on your own and do your thing.
Okay.
And one of the absolute best pieces I saw about the whole exchange, the other thing that Ben Sass had, moments after Ted Cruz throws a performative tantrum that was tailor-made for Hannity, Sass says, I think we should recognize that the jackassery we often see around here is partly because of people mugging for short-term camera opportunities, as he's sitting next to Ted Cruz.
Hint. All right.
Hint.
I
So
guess
the
so.
look on Cruz's face was just priceless.
All right. I can believe it, and we even saw it through his goofy beard.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the other thing that I think is worth noting is Molly Jong-Fast's take on this as a working mom.
Oh.
And she had a lovely piece in the Atlantic about this, which I thought was very much worth highlighting.
All right.
And, she says, look, even the eminently accomplished Ketanji Brown Jackson knows the struggle of trying to balance a career and parenthood. And there's a wonderful picture of her daughter, looking up at her as she, swears an oath somewhere. I don't know quite where that picture is.
Okay.
But
I didn't see that one, but I did see a picture of her daughter recently.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful picture, and it's a wonderful family picture.
Yeah.
And here's the picture that I was looking at. It's the top of the...
here we go.
It's the top of the article from Molly John Best. And she says, amid the partisan grandstanding and enumeration of credentials, a few lines about parenthood pierced me the most. Addressing her two daughters seated in the audience, Jackson said, girls, I know it's not been easy as I've tried to navigate the challenges of juggling my career and motherhood. And I fully admit I didn't always get the balance right, but I hope you have seen that with hard work, determination, and love, it can be done. I love you so much. As a daughter of a working mother and a working mother myself, I know something like the struggle that Jackson was talking about. I felt a lump in my throat. I won't do the piece justice by just reading it, but
do your best.
That sentiment, I think, is pretty widely shared. She did fine. She defended herself fine. She was mostly unflappable. I saw some idiot pundits, come up with the line that, well, Hawley's line of questioning on day 2 was very piercing. No, it wasn't. It was exposing Hawley. And she did fine, and she will do fine, and she'll be confirmed. And, the fact that Republicans are who they are is just on display for everybody. Now, the problem isn't that Democrats didn't defend her. The problem isn't that Republicans who are on the Judiciary Committee, like Blackburn, are clearly showing you who they are, and Hawley and Cruz. The problem is that people in America vote for them. That's the problem.
Yes,
and nothing about how Democrats defend Brown Jackson has anything to do with the bigger problem of the fact that, I saw it, and what's wrong with it? I like it.
All right. That's an interesting point. Yeah, there's some low-down, dirty neighbors we have out there.
Well, yeah, I mean...
Not the one that's
now, meanwhile...
attack. She's very nice, but yeah.
Ian Millhiser writes in Vox, black voters suffer another significant loss in the Supreme Court. The justices are concerned that Wisconsin's legislative maps may give too much political power to black people, so they threw out the redistricting
Yes,
stuff.
well, you can't have that.
Without comment.
Right.
Using what they call the shadow docket.
Right. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. Yes, we've got some extensive write-ups. Can you explain what
a shadow docket is?
Not really. It's yes. I mean, I guess essentially what they're talking about, if I understand correctly, they're talking about the choice of cases that they make in terms of what to take up and what not to take up, and there are, it matters which ones they choose for review and which ones they don't, and what happens to cases that they decide not to take up.
Yeah, how sometimes they say we're not going to do this one.
Right.
But other times they say specifically we're not only not going to do this one, but we're going to remand or change something without comment.
Yes.
That's where it gets weird. I understand that I don't want to take this up.
Yes, right.
But I don't understand. I don't want to take this up, but by the way, you can't do that. And I'm not telling you why, and it doesn't matter. You just can't do it.
All right, yes. Some of them come with additional orders and some don't. But essentially, sometimes if you just don't take a case, that has a certain result. That the result from the immediately previous, the last court to touch it now, that ruling stands. And so when you decline to take a case, you also know that means you're essentially upholding the ruling of the court below.
But that's not what happened here.
But in
the court's
in
decision in Wisconsin Legislature versus Wisconsin Elections Commission, or as they like to say, V, Wisconsin Legislature v. Wisconsin Elections Commission, strikes down state legislative maps selected by the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
Right.
So they didn't just say, no, I'm not taking the case up. They said, no, you can't do these maps that you did.
Yes, and I guess sometimes, ordinarily this would be the sort of thing that they would have, they used to consider that mandatory to explain themselves if they were saying, well, we're not taking the case because there's no controversy of law that we think we can or should settle here. But what we do see is, and what is in our view an error by the last court to touch it,
And therefore, it's a summary reversal.
Yes, so you're wrong. It goes back down to the trial court, perhaps with instructions to do something different that the appeals court messed up. But other than saying, no, that's clearly wrong, redo it, they don't want to address any of the finer points of law. They don't see any. They just see an error that is to them obvious, or, that they don't care to explain. That's the new thing. To just say, this is the way we want it. And if we explained ourselves, we would look foolish and contradictory. So let's not.
So
and that's it.
The end result is the end result.
Yes, I've got a longer piece
court,
that I can read.
As Millheiser points out, the court raced unusually fast to overturn Governor Evers' map.
Yes, that is true.
Setting aside the novelty of the legal rule, law professor and election law expert Rick Hasen writes that the way this case was handled is bizarre and another signal of a conservative supermajority of the Supreme Court showing increasing hostility to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. There's a number of procedural problems with the Wisconsin legislator opinion. For one thing, the court reaches this new precedent-setting conclusion despite minimal briefing. The case arose on the court's shadow docket, a mix of historically very brief orders and emergency rulings that the justices decide on an expedited basis. The court, moreover, raced to decide issues that were barely litigated in the lower courts. And finally, it's unclear how Wednesday's decision can be squared with the so-called Purcell principle. Mm-hmm. In Purcell v. Gonzalez, the court warned that judges should be reluctant to hand down decisions impacting elections as the election itself draws nigh, except when they feel like it.
Right. David Neer wrote a piece about it, about that particular aspect of it, that the court just recently said we're not going to take X case because it's too close to the election and judges shouldn't meddle with lines so close to the election. And then a couple weeks later, because time is linear, handled this case in such a way that the lines are going to be overturned and redrawn even closer to the election. But I see no contradiction in that.
So the court, in other words, appears to have gone out of its way to decide an important voting rights case with minimal briefing on an extraordinarily expedited schedule, despite warnings from conservative justices that judges should be more cautious in election years.
Yes.
And the bottom line is black people now have less sway in Wisconsin's elections.
Yeah. And that's what they were after. Yeah, they have some weird rules about election years. It reminded me.
Right. So should Ketanji Brown Jackson be appointed? Would that have changed the ruling? Probably not. It still would have been 6-3. But having her voice heard when discussing those sorts of things is important.
If you can get your voice heard on one of these shadow docket things, you can always speak out, I suppose.
Well, there were dissents. I mean, I think Sotomayor, one of the other justices, wrote a dissent which they put their name on.
Yeah, you can still do that. They can't prevent you from saying, hey, I think this was a terrible decision and here's why. It's just that the people who say what the decision should be and win don't explain themselves. I'm not going to tell you why I did it, but she can tell you why she didn't, I guess.
Right, and the principle.
And it gives it away, typically. Yeah.
That the people who want to decide get to decide and they have the power to decide is exactly what was on display from the Republicans when they were questioning Ketanji Brown Jackson yesterday.
Yes.
They were clearly stating to the country, conservative principles apply, and if they don't, we object. And it's got nothing to do with your qualifications. It's got nothing to do with anything, really, except we don't want you here.
Yeah.
Because if you're there,
pretty much,
it impedes, perhaps, our ability to decide things the way we want to decide them, and we're not having
even
it.
though it really doesn't, because as you mentioned,
and basically,
6-3.
Lindsey Graham said that, and Durbin said, you're full of crap, and Lindsey Graham got mad and walked out.
Yeah, well, at least he walked out.
Yeah, came back.
I mean, that's actually a good thing. You can't stop him, but anytime he's out of there is
and nobody knows where Clarence Thomas is.
Right.
It's 9:20. Do you know where Clarence Thomas is?
Yes, Sibley Memorial Hospital. But
I thought he was supposed to be released on Monday.
Yeah,
they're very secretive about this stuff.
This is the shadow chart, I guess. He's a patient, but we won't acknowledge it. I saw somebody tweeting today that I guess Justice Breyer says, "Oh no, he's fine. He's in no danger." I don't know why Justice Breyer was prevailed upon to give that opinion. But I'm sure he thought he was being helpful and friendly, and it may very well be the case that he'll be fine shortly. But he's
And
not
it may
now.
very well be the case that Justice Breyer is helpful and friendly.
Right.
They're just, the whole
I don't
SCOTUS
think he's
mystique here
lying
is just
about
weird.
it. He's just, but he hasn't heard anything to the contrary.
Can't have cameras in the court. We're not going to tell you when we're sick. We decide things and we don't really tell you. But you're supposed to respect
we'll
that we're always
recuse.
above the law and thinking everything completely impartially because we're judges, we're justices.
And we don't have to do any of this because no one can take us to task.
Yeah, if you don't like it, too bad for you because we get to decide.
Recuse, not recuse. Yeah.
So speaking of politics, because SCOTUS has always
the
been
show.
political.
Yeah.
But this isn't SCOTUS. This is just partisan power politics.
Oh.
Here's a story
Yes.
in Politico, how Trump threw Mo Brooks under the bus.
Oh, with both hands, I hope.
The Alabama congressman and MAGA loyalist learned he had lost Trump's endorsement through a reporter's tweet.
Not even his tweet.
Right.
He can't do that anymore. He put it on Truth Social, but no one saw it.
Mo Brooks of Alabama, said Trump, made a horrible mistake recently when he went woke and stated, referring to, can you imagine Mo Brooks woke? Referring to the 2020 presidential, I can imagine Mo Brooks armed, but hardly Mo Brooks woke. Put that behind you. Put that behind you. Despite the fact that the election was rife with fraud and irregularities. So minutes later, the Alabama congressman went on WERC, a Birmingham, Alabama talk radio station, to hit back at Trump. He didn't have the courtesy or the chutzpah or whatever to let me know first, so he somewhat blindsided me. But it's what it is.
What?
It's not about what happened in the rally, because the rally speech I gave was almost exactly the same as what I said on January 6th. We have to put our play behind you.
Oh.
And then, I don't know if they were here, but he also went on to say, Trump, months after the January 6th thing, still wanted to get rid of Biden and appoint himself president.
Okay.
And so he was still trying to overthrow the government of the United States, Mo Brooks affirms.
All right. I can't believe Mo Brooks said chutzpah.
Right. So,
Did he say chutzpah like Michelle Bachmann?
Chutzpah.
Yeah.
You know.
Wow, Mo Brooks. Okay.
Yeah. He said that while eating a pastrami sandwich on white bread with a glass of milk.
This could be true. All right, and in a bulletproof vest as well.
Right. In the meantime, Charles Bethea, writing in the New Yorker, can anyone unseat Marjorie Taylor Greene? Although it got thrown out by Madison Cawthorn, a lawsuit filed today argues Marjorie Taylor Greene is an insurrectionist and thus disqualified by the 14th Amendment from running for office again. And he points out, whatever hope remains for the Georgia Congresswoman's many detractors seems to depend on either a new lawsuit or a candidate who's been called Marjorie with a brain. Her nickname in her district, of course, is MTG.
Yep.
Play on the Congresswoman's initials that he was fond of, and told me this is, what's his name, John Cowan, the Marjorie with a brain. He maintains most elected officials were fed up with MTG, and told me party strategists he's spoken to in D.C. wish they could replace her. He hoped, too, that redistricting might make the district more moderate and set the stage for a more competitive rematch. In that last hope, he was disappointed. Though Cowan is not among them, there are at least 5 candidates vying to take on Greene this fall, including 3 Democrats, one of whom will almost certainly lose in November.
Oh, well, I mean, okay.
Just because of what the district is. But the strongest Republican in the field, apart from Greene, is likely Jennifer Strahan, a healthcare executive who describes herself as all the conservative without any of the crazy.
We'll see.
She lives in Atlanta, near Atlanta, in a part of Cobb County that was brought into the 14th by redistricting, so she didn't vote in Greene's race, but she assured me she would have written in somebody. She voted for Trump, and when I spoke to her, she conceded somewhat reluctantly he did indeed lose to Biden. She declined to connect Trump to the violent insurrection that took place at the Capitol on January 6th. That's why those hearings coming up are so important.
Yeah,
I wasn't there, she said. I can't speak to the specifics of things. Anytime we have violence and vandalism in any form by anyone, it should be condemned. When I asked whether she would criticize Trump, she said, I don't think it would bring value to what I'm trying to accomplish.
All right, that's just low-key crazy.
Yeah. But, low-key crazy is better.
Yeah, I mean, it's a step.
I would,
certainly.
Steve King,
down
Iowa,
because of the
I don't need him mouthing off.
Right. I mean, anything they can get rid of MTG is a great thing. But, well, it starts out as a great thing anyway. And I'll take it.
Right. Look, I mean, if the GOP wants to declare that they're against interracial marriage.
As they have.
As they have.
Right.
Like this week.
Yeah.
Then, just
then
lay it out
will.
there. Lay it out there for
Okay.
everybody and let people decide.
Yeah. Let's see if they have the chutzpah to do it. Mel Brooks. Okay. Woke Mel Brooks. Wow.
That's Mo Brooks, not Mel Brooks. Just in
Right.
case anybody, had any trouble deciding.
Oh, see,
with-
that's why
with
okay. I've been mistaking the guy the whole time. It's so much
Yeah.
easier to... All right, well, throw Mo Brooks under the bus. Okay. Good. I hope it's a big bus.
But, the fact that Mo Brooks admitted that Trump was still trying to overthrow the United States government, I think, is a bigger deal than,
I hope so. Yeah.
news has time to cover it because, there's the Ukraine thing, which we'll talk about a little bit after the break.
Okay,
and,
very good.
there's the Supreme Court hearings. And who has time for the fact that Trump is still trying to overthrow the government of the United States?
Yeah, and I guess, open question whether you can trust Mo Brooks in his storytelling, but we'll see. I mean, I guess put him under oath and see if he tells the same story or if he tries to shy away from the subpoena. I have my doubts about where the story goes from here, just because...
Here's the quote.
Yeah.
Mo Brooks asked Trump asked him to rescind the 2020 elections, immediately remove Joe Biden from the White House, immediately put President Trump back in the White House, and hold a new special election for presidency.
Sure. Yeah, because we have those all the time.
It's like, what's the problem?
Yeah.
So Trump wants that, so what? We knew that,
I don't
right?
know.
It's not news.
My visions of what happens here is that Mo Brooks unendorses himself to try to win back MAGA voters. So we'll see. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kgrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's pay attention to the rest of the world.
Well, the rest of the world, let's see, how about this op-ed in the New York Times from the Estonia Prime Minister?
Oh.
I'm the Prime Minister of Estonia. That's the headline.
Well, isn't
That's
that
the actual
special?
headline.
Yeah, it is. I see it.
But there's also another piece of the headline.
okay.
It says, Putin can't think he's won this war. But the important thing is that she's the Prime Minister.
That's
of
kind
Estonia.
of funny, the way to you have to declare yourself, because who do we don't know the Prime Minister of Estonia. That's all right. Well, now we'll listen to you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Right. I'm the
who is
author
it?
of this book, and you don't know what you're talking about
Yeah, where's the
in your review.
name?
At NATO, she says, our focus should be simple. Mr. Putin cannot win this war. He cannot even think he has won, or his appetite will grow. We need to demonstrate the will and commit resources to defend NATO territory to check Russia's aggression. We need to put in place a long-term policy of smart containment. So it's essentially a new Cold War, relevant because NATO is meeting as we speak, with Biden trying to rally the troops there and get everybody on the same page, including with economic sanctions. And Zelensky does not mince words, says Zach Besu, in his video address to the NATO summit.
Okay.
Never, please, never tell us again that our army does not meet NATO standards. We have shown what our standards are capable of.
Oh, well, that's an argument, yes.
As he says this, Russian landing vessel Orsk, O-R-S-K, is now to meet SpongeBob
What?
at the Verdansk port. There's a picture of this Russian troop transporter blowing up
Oh.
with secondary explosions.
Mm-hmm.
So the Navy was
Look
sunk
at that.
by a country that doesn't have a navy.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, if you come to a port, then they can walk up to your boat, I guess. That's true. All right, a naval battle won by a country without a navy. So
Well,
I
of
guess
course,
it
this
meets
happens.
SpongeBob. That's cool.
The thing about Twitter is you can always find somebody who knows something about something. Here's a piece from the Independent from the UK. Russian Navy boat, a different story, different time. Russian Navy boat sinks after walrus attack during Arctic expedition.
That seems...
Sailors and scientists on board escape unscathed from dangerous incidents. So, look, maybe the Ukrainians have trained walruses and haven't been telling us.
That could be.
You know?
This
hey,
looks like
the U.S. Navy has SEALs. Why can't Ukraine have walruses?
It's just a really long acronym. And
I'm just saying.
Ukrainian's a tough language.
Yeah.
Could be.
The bottom line is when you don't have a navy, but you take out your opponent's navy, that's like the war's not going really well for you.
Yeah, I'll say. Then there was the naval commanding officer who got killed despite their not having a navy too. Is this meet SpongeBob? Is that how the
like
kids
he's
say
at the bottom of the
Davy
ocean?
Jones's locker, but everyone's
Davy
like,
Jones's locker.
Who's
only
Davy
nobody
Jones?
knows that is anymore. And of course, I sent you the greatest meme of all, which is the Ukrainian tractor, which is towing a sunk Russian boat with Z painted on it.
Oh yeah, did they put Z on the boats?
Yeah, okay. I don't know.
I don't think
this cartoonist did.
That's supposed to. All right, poetic license, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, the Ukrainian tractor is doing great work there, by the way. Oh, I've been thinking somebody should put that on one of those.
I think they should let the Ukrainian tractors join NATO. And,
at the very least.
Let the rest of the country catch up, and all in due time.
They should make, I wanted to make those Molon Labe come and take it memes out of like these things with the tractor saying, okay, towing away tanks and...
Well, we have the 82nd Airborne, but Ukraine has the 1st Tractor Division.
Yeah. They've really done a lot of work.
They have done a tremendous amount of work.
Okay.
All right. Meanwhile, Russia continues to be a pariah and do like war crimes things, which is why Biden said, you guys are doing war crimes. Julia Ioffe reports colleagues of Russian journalist Oksana Balina, who was killed yesterday in Kyiv, are pointing to evidence that she may have been targeted by a drone.
Oh.
So if they're specifically going to take out journalists, add that to the war crimes.
Yeah, that's, wow. Okay, I didn't realize. I thought she just was, a collateral casualty of an attack somewhere, but it never occurred to me.
I mean, this wasn't polonium tea or sitting too close to a window.
Wow. Right.
But it was just as bad if, in fact, that story is true.
Okay.
Julia Ioffe is a pretty good reporter, so.
Yeah, all right. Well, stay out of Ukraine, Julia. I guess. I don't know. Is she there?
No,
okay.
I don't think so.
I mean, she's overseas.
Just talking about colleagues.
Frequently, but okay, good. All right. Well, the Russians will kill you anywhere, I guess.
Right. Anyway, obviously, always careful about what you read on Twitter. Things may or may not be true. What looked to be a Russian admission that there were lots of casualties turns out to be faked. So that was rescinded, but still there have been tremendous numbers of casualties, whether Russia acknowledges it or not, in a slightly different field. Misinformation is the topic here. This is Kai Cooper-Smith, who's just a superb infectious disease reporter.
Oh.
So I said a few times how this pandemic has played out so far makes me think I can't just remain an infectious disease reporter, but have to understand and write about misinformation and how it spreads too. So I said, good, welcome to the club. We need you. Here's a first story and thread on this. First off, delving into a new field is the most daunting and most rewarding part of being a journalist. It will take time to know this area as well as I know infections. So if you know of fascinating ideas, research scientists out there, point me in the right direction, he said. And my answer to that was you should talk to Michael Mann and the climate people. They know all about misinformation, bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that. Is that what they're calling it now? That's the new word for propaganda?
Yeah.
Information bull.
Yeah. Carl Bershman actually calls it. That's what he calls it in the article.
All right. Well, then you're allowed to say it, I guess. I mean, I'll make work for myself by bleeping it anyway.
I'll allow it. Right. The guy's sitting with the Mexican hat with his feet up on the table. So the title of the article is called "Detecting Bullshit."
Well,
studying the spread of misinformation should become a top scientific priority, says biologist Carl Bergstrom.
All right.
And, some very interesting points that are made here, which he goes on to continue with. What have I learned? No surprise. It's complicated. A few basic points. More and more researchers in various fields are seeing this as a huge existential problem and starting to work it out. I also suggest that he talk to Brendan Nyhan, the social scientist who are working on hesitancy. So there's a lot of scientific expertise in this field.
All right.
Beyond just infectious disease folks who are pretty familiar with the vaccine folks. And by the way, I would add any lawyer who ever worked on the cigarette and tobacco settlements, include them.
Yeah, okay.
They know all about bullshit.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Thank you for smoking, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
More and more researchers in various fields are seeing this as a huge problem. For example, here's what Bergstrom wrote recently in a paper. Misinformation has reached crisis proportions. It poses a risk to international peace, interferes with democratic decision-making, engineers the well-being of the planet, and threatens public health. That's small d democratic. How big the problem is hard to tell and difficult to study. There's a lot of misinformation, no question, but what impact does it actually have? Does it change behavior? Or is it a symptom of people's already changed behavior because of polarization, et cetera, et cetera? Take the pandemic.
Please.
Bergstrom's view is that a third of the U.S. being unvaccinated is ample proof of the impact. But as he well knows, and as others have pointed out, correlation is not causation. Broadly speaking, there's two main approaches to studying misinformation. One concentrates more on networks and how far and wide certain pieces of misinformation spread, like those who study Fox News. The other concentrates more on how people interact with the misinformation and what it does to the beliefs and actions, and that's where the social scientists come in.
All right.
And both approaches have limitations. Studying how misinformation spreads may allow you to identify it more easily, but whether and how that would actually impact the beliefs people hold or how they behave is an entirely different question. Like, you can point out that Fox News is terrible and lies all the time, but if people still watch it, what good does it do to do that?
Yeah. Maybe they'll feel guilty.
On the other hand, Trump taught us that doesn't happen.
No.
On the other hand, it can be difficult to see big effects on people's beliefs or actions in rigorous studies in a lab setting, but we don't live in a lab, and we live in an information ecosystem that constantly bombards us with information. Just look around. It's a complete shift in how the information ecology works at a social level. How can you not expect it to have an impact? An ecological shift of this nature doesn't lend itself to that kind of study. So my takeaway from this, Kai Cooper-Smith, the success of this burgeoning new field of misinformation research may well depend on how well these two different approaches can be bridged or made to complement each other. And while this research may inform regulation in the future, the field actually needs regulation itself to be successful. Right now, scientists are severely hampered by the lack of data access from social media companies. The only way in which we can create that discipline is by policymakers forcing tech companies to provide data access. And many researchers see a trade-off between needing actionable answers right now for a big problem and rigorously dissecting a fiendishly complex set of issues. And that's where a call for crisis discipline comes in. And there's actually a paper on that.
Crisis discipline.
Crisis discipline. Or the way it is in Proceedings National Academy of Sciences, stewardship of global collective behavior. We argue the study of collective behavior must rise to a crisis discipline just as medicine, conservation, and climate science has, with a focus on providing actionable insight to policymakers for the stewardship of social systems. That is to say, don't just write about it, give us some key things that we can do.
Well, that's everyone's complaint.
Yeah,
okay.
Well, they're on it.
All right, well, at least they'll be studying it. That's something. Well, all right, that's weird. Okay. Where was I in this? I had this open, and did I accidentally close it? Oh, I went through to the paper you were talking about. That's why. Okay. All right. Well.
Oh, you know how the worst people in the world say things that you are forced to agree with because they're right?
Oh, sometimes, yeah.
So Alan Dershowitz says he's very disappointed in his former student Ted Cruz because it's bigotry.
Yeah. Did he have Judge Jackson when she was a student? They were classmates. She and Cruz. I did not realize that it was the case.
That I don't know.
Okay. Well, she probably was in there. She was very active at school. Apparently, a lot of people making claims to fame, having been in various clubs and activities with her. So That sounds fun. Nobody says that about Ted Cruz, interestingly enough.
Well, I'll tell you somebody famous I met.
Oh, all right.
And who I very
singer?
much appreciate, and that is Madeleine Albright.
Oh, yes.
Who died yesterday.
Right. Not related to your having met her.
No, I met her about 15 years ago.
Okay, good.
And I was on a panel talking about pandemic flu preparation. So I was a guest of the conference.
Yes.
And she was a special guest of the conference because she was the keynote speaker. So all the speakers and, the organizers and stuff like that had one of those pre-conference dinners where you're invited to, which, as a introvert, I, cringe at, but, at least it's an opportunity to meet people and talk with them. As an introvert, I cringe at, but, it's still fun sometimes.
Chicken or fish?
Chicken or fish. And so Madeleine Albright, who's not a tall woman, but nonetheless managed to dominate the room. Right? You couldn't see her in a crowd, but you could see the crowd.
Oh, yeah, that's a good way. Know where she is.
To know where she is. And I got a chance to speak with her a little bit. And just a delightful, very straightforward person. And then, this was 15 some odd years ago, so forgive me for not remembering all of the details. Mm-hmm. But she told a story of how she participated in an exercise of flu pandemic preparedness. And in this particular tabletop exercise, which was international in scope, she played the President of the United States having to make all these tough decisions about what to do in a pandemic. And listening to her present the options and what she could and couldn't do and what she would and wouldn't do was fabulous. And you got the impression this woman is incredibly qualified to be president, perhaps more qualified than the person who currently was president at the time. And it really didn't matter who that was. I mean, she was just great. And, everybody I know who knew her much better than I did from just meeting her the one time, sort of felt the same way about her. Incredibly competent, incredibly straightforward, very action-oriented, very clear in both her thinking and her expression, and a real loss. Yes, well,
true, and lots of remembrances of her, and mixed in with a good number of people who are anti-war activists who are upset with her as well. But you get that mix when it's time to eulogize someone. But yeah, an interesting memory. And did you get the sense that she would have handled the pandemic better than Trump?
Yes.
Okay. Better than Biden, though?
Much the
same way. Okay, yeah, that's certainly possible. Not everybody really super satisfied with the way it's going right now.
I mean, because she, was clearly articulating what sorts of things she was balancing and why she was doing what she was doing. And, that's part of, I think, although Biden's response has been good, that part's been missing. Yeah. And I think she would have been horrified at how CDC explains things and would have replaced the director with somebody who can explain it better.
Yeah, well, you hope so. I mean, on the one hand, sometimes at these training exercises you perform better than you do or would in real life because you're at a training exercise of pandemic preparation people, so you're going to go out of your way to lean in the direction they want you to.
Well, but in these tabletops, it's not so easy because typically, for example, if you have to balance social services with military options, you have social services people playing the social service role, and you have military people playing the military role, and they really get into it.
Okay. So
they get into their role.
You feel the pressure.
You feel exactly what you would feel if you were in that circumstance.
Right.
It doesn't feel like an exercise.
Okay.
It feels like I'm arguing with the head of the Pentagon here about why some of that money needs to be diverted for social services, and I'm arguing with HHS about why some of that stuff has to go to the Pentagon.
And so you can't
and they're not happy
say,
about
like,
it.
well, I'm going with these guys because it's their dinner. They paid. Like, that's not allowed.
No, that's really...
You're trying to do it realistically. But,
often these things are sponsored by large enough entities, including sometimes the government itself, that you're not really in the situation of, I have to pander to the sponsor.
Okay. Well, I mean, even so, even if you actually did pander to the sponsor,
I say that having participated,
been trained to do that, and then maybe in real life you would say, I remember how I reacted to this in the training, and you might forget, and it was because they paid for the rubber chicken.
Well, I promise you, it's just as difficult in a exercise as it is in real life.
All right.
To say to somebody who's like, really high up on the chain, and say to them in front of everybody else, including their peers, that I know you just said something, but it really doesn't make any sense and you're wrong.
Oh.
That is very difficult to tell somebody.
I would imagine so. Like, no one told Donald Trump that for 4 years. And what
for
happened?
40 years.
Oh, yeah. and as a result, then he got 4 years in office to do it again to the rest of us, even though we knew that he was terrible. Well, all right. Those training exercises must have been very interesting.
They're pretty intense.
Yeah, I guess so. Boy, everybody getting into the role and everything. Dinner or no dinner?
It's usually not over dinner.
Oh, right. Yeah,
it's over a table, but
it's when dinner is over. They do.
Dinner's later. Dinner's yesterday.
Oh, okay. Is that the wind up, the end? Congratulations, we all did a good job.
Dinner's yesterday, and then you spend the whole day in this locked room, with these antagonistic people trying to convince them that your way of doing it is right.
Yeah, and then you say, "I volunteered to do this. Why did I come here?"
Yeah, I'll do this again.
Well, you people.
Thanks for asking me.
Yeah. All right. Very interesting. Do you remember the scarf she was wearing that day?
I remember she was wearing a pin, but I don't remember which one, because she always wore
the
pins.
pin thing, right? Yeah, okay. Scarf is the other one we don't like.
Yeah, Scarf Lady's somebody different, but
yes.
she always had pin.
Put me in mind of that. Okay, everybody's got to have a trademark. Hat, pin, scarf. All right. Rollerblades.
Maybe you remember probably her most famous line, during Clinton's run. One of Clinton's
Tell me if I do.
There's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women.
I do remember that. I don't think I would be able to attribute it to her, though. But
that was her.
Ding. Now I do. Okay.
That's the way she spoke, and that's the way, very straightforward, look, here's where I stand, here's where you stand.
And if everything's going well, she won't find out whether she's right. So good. Okay. Wow. Well, all right. That's quite a bit as it is. Are there any other major catastrophes we haven't touched on that you meant to? Or
no, I think that's about it. I don't think there's anything to say about the People's Convoy. If they're still there, nobody knows.
I don't know. Yeah, you're right. I should check with, what's his name? Zach. I don't remember Zach's name. Petroza. Oh, all right, I'll find him.
Oh, yeah.
Called his name out 5 times this week, and I still don't know.
Zach
his name is Zach. All right, I'll go looking to see, but I think they might still be there. Oh, I think I put something in Pocket about something they did yesterday, and they're having some leadership disagreements, and people are arguing with the guy who ostensibly put it together, and going really well.
So here's his last tweet, which was 21 hours ago.
Okay.
Zachary Petrizzo. The People's Convoy is growing increasingly impatient. In a meeting this morning, organizer Brian Brace pushed back against truckers growing tired and declaring that driving around the Beltway in circles is a waste. I don't think it's a waste, said the organizer.
The guy who's responsible for it?
Something.
I don't think I'm a waste, is what he's saying. Okay. My strategy's fine.
Right, and then he also tweeted, got my first, this is retweeting somebody, got my first glimpse of the trucker convoy yesterday. I was in the free-flowing lanes of 495 SB, and 7 or 8 flag-festoon truckers were on 495 northbound NB, heading to 270 back to Hagerstown. They were sitting in traffic not of their making, the same traffic commuters sit in daily.
Yeah, that's basically it.
I can't help but laugh at the bunch of adults whose sole accomplishment is sitting in Beltway traffic every day for the last 3 weeks. Nobody acknowledges them. They blew the air horns, and the reaction from every driver around them was nothing.
Yeah. They thought that they would be the center of attention causing the traffic jam. They
look
can't
what
even
happened
get to a place to cause one.
Ottawa.
Yeah. Look, that was
we want to be them.
Semi-organic thing that happened, and well, you know how it is. These are also the sequels always suck, right? That's basically what it comes down to. You're trying to imitate something that happened, organically or not, in Canada, and it's just a different thing. The restrictions there were different. The grievance there was different.
The preparation was quite a bit different.
Yeah, okay.
And the part of authorities, they were ready for this. They were not ready for this in Ottawa.
Right, that's true. And, it's hard to
and the Ottawa reaction seemed to be, like, for at least a week, if not 3. It's like, I can't believe you Canadians are actually trying to make mischief here.
Yeah.
We're going to have to cite you for making mischief if you don't stop.
That was news to them.
And so they did, and then they went away.
All right. Well, at least they did do that. And, now they just sit in traffic here, and people pass them and give them the finger, and they complain about that.
Right. And here's another a very important piece of news. Tulsi Gabbard says Instagram is suppressing her voice. She says she usually gets 250 to 300,000 views, and the video she posted last night only got 15,000.
Oh. Well, I don't know what to say.
Right.
That seems like a lot for her to get anyway. But I guess she says she gets more. So.
I mean,
I'm being
cares.
Throttled. I mean, I guess, could it be that she's dropping in popularity?
Could it be that people are unimpressed with her?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, maybe she should try putting on a show. Juggle or light something on fire in your video.
Right. So Matt Deperno, who's running in Michigan as a Trump-endorsed candidate for Michigan Attorney General, apparently was fired from his former law firm with allegations of fraud, deceit, and dishonesty. This is probably going to come as a shock to you.
Oh, yes.
But these aren't always the best people.
No. And that's why he's running for Attorney General, so he can get himself cleared of those charges.
Right.
Good. It's the Trump strategy. It's catching on. Popular everywhere. Okay. Well, that seems to be pretty much the state of things.
Right. And Ryan Burge, who follows all things religious, from a political scientist point of view, has a fascinating post that I just came across, which I'll read to you. In 2008, 16% of self-identified evangelicals attended church seldom or never.
Okay, like the trucker guy who said.
In 2021, it was 29%.
Oops, I just dropped a quarter. Did you hear that?
Okay.
Okay.
And the percentage who attended church less than once a month was 29% in 2008. Now it's 42%.
I never go.
Less than half of self-identified evangelicals are weekly attenders.
Yeah.
Okay, evangelical has now become like Republican.
You just
right. It's not based on I go to church and my pastor says this. It's I'm just supporting it.
Yeah, I'm generally speaking.
Generally speaking, Republicans are them and they are me, and so now I'm evangelical because I'm a Republican. So now I'm evangelical because Republicans are evangelicals. I don't go to church or anything like that.
Right. Right. Well, the trucker guy just said that I guess it's very popular. He made a big point of saying that he had this Christian awakening, but I'm not going to church. I mean, that's just, I don't know. That's for losers, I guess. But it's an interesting phenomenon. I mean, that was what used to define it, and they would shame one another about not being in church. And now you can just slap your label on it.
And if what I'm saying doesn't make sense to you, you should really watch the SCOTUS hearings. Okay. And you'll get it, because this is all about white Christian resentment.
Yeah. And you can become one just by declaring yourself one. And that's interesting, because they also spent a good portion of the hearings yesterday, Republicans did, Ted Cruz anyway, ranting about about transgender issues and mocking the idea of, well, can you just declare yourself this or that? And I guess you can do it if you're just declaring yourself an evangelical Christian. That's okay. But if you're declaring yourself something else, or it has to do with gender, that's an outrage. The other one is about, God and the origin of the universe and the moral code that governs us all. This other one, though, is the really important thing. What bathroom are you going to go into? They get outraged by the strangest things. But I guess if you can always declare God to be on your side, you'll do it. Yeah. Again, to remind people, as Lincoln did, the problem is whether or not you're on God's side. So with that, how do you top Lincoln? I will, turn over the mic to David Waldman, Kagro in the Morning, whose show it is. Yes, thank you. And I'll be back on Monday. You'll be back on Monday, but you have a recorded thing for tomorrow? Yeah, I do. I need to do like the last 5 minutes of it, and I've needed to do that for a day and a half now. So good luck to me finishing that up, and should be no problem. Maybe I can ask permission to go longer. I recorded a piece that went like 7 minutes when I needed 5, and now I don't think I can find 2 minutes to shoehorn the thing in. Maybe I can borrow 2 minutes from Justice tomorrow. I'll ask him. Okay, more housekeeping than you bargained for, but now we're almost out of time. So I can take it from here, Greg. No problem.
Well, good, because you'll have to.
Yeah, I have no choice. Let's see. Well, you can feel free to hang in there and listen to the rest of it. I'm wondering, should I start on the Wisconsin thing and carry it over?
Well, you should, because I think that needs a lot of cleaning up based on how I mangled it.
Okay. Well, let's see. I put aside from David Neer. He tweeted about it yesterday. I told you that he had pointed out this particular hypocrisy of it, saying 6 weeks ago in early February, SCOTUS stayed a ruling ordering Alabama to redraw its congressional map. A lower court said, yeah, these maps, no good, you got to redraw them. And the SCOTUS stepped in to say, no, don't redraw them because it's too late. We're too close to the election, and that would be interfering in the election. Now, though, in late March, as opposed to early February, it is ordering Wisconsin to do just that, redraw its legislative maps. So he was playing off of Steve Fladek's tweeting about it, which is also probably worth sharing, but then put together his own piece for Daily Kos explaining his stance as well. Now, that one we're probably not going to be able to shoehorn in there, but Supreme Hypocrisy, as he titled it. High Court intervenes late to block Wisconsin maps despite its own precedent. And it's not even like old ancient precedent that they can overlook because it's from 50 years ago. It's measured in a matter of weeks. All right, we'll get to the fuller piece and then maybe read a little bit of what Steve Vladek had to say. Plus, I've got something, I believe, from Election Law Blog about it, too. We'll make you sorry you asked when we come back. Thanks, Greg. We'll see you on Monday. The rest of you, be back here in a minute. I'm going to take a break, go grab the water I forgot before the beginning of the show. Good job staying quiet over there, construction guys. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I guess we'll just continue on then with the thread that we began, thinking about the Wisconsin decision and how ridiculous it really was. Did David link to his piece in his tweets? No, I don't think so. So, all right, I'll go back over to I thought I had, I opened it up in Pocket but didn't open the original. Okay, here we go. Back over to Supreme Hypocrisy. High Court blocks new Wisconsin maps that would have increased black representation, as David reports it. And let's see. In an unsigned opinion released on Wednesday, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Wisconsin's new legislative maps, saying that the state Supreme Court, remember, by the way, where our states' rights are everything, and what's his name, Mike Brunheimer, whatever. Leave everything to the states. Well, the state Supreme Court ruled on it. But they say, the United States Supreme Court says that the state Supreme Court violated the Voting Rights Act, which they don't care anything about, in selecting a map for the state assembly that would increase the number of black majority districts in the Milwaukee area from 6 to 7. You got that? The current Supreme Court now thinks that it violates the Voting Rights Act to increase the number of black majority districts in the Milwaukee area from 6 to 7. So much so that they would intervene in this case and say, clearly requires our intervention, but not a full hearing. Just do what we want you to do and don't ask us why. That's it. David continues. The response from legal analysts was one of, what do you think? I mean, if you thought I was exaggerating about them saying, well, we want this, so just do it, and there's no explanation as to why, well, then you will be surprised to learn that the response from legal analysts was one of disgust and incredulity, because how could you possibly, right? Slate's Mark Joseph Stern dubbed the ruling absolutely shocking, while UC Irvine professor Rick Hazen called it bizarre on many levels. I think Greg mentioned his name earlier. Without full briefing or oral argument, the hallmark of the so-called shadow docket, the court's far-right supermajority is using this emergency order, says Hazen, to chip away at the Voting Rights Act, because they love it so much, without acknowledging that it is killing off the last major protection for minority voters from discriminatory districting plans. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, joined in dissent by Justice Elena Kagan, said the majority's decision was unprecedented and picked apart the many flaws in its reasoning, but unmentioned by Sotomayor was the majority's monumental hypocrisy in intervening so belatedly in this case. 6 weeks ago, but let me just point that out for just a moment. Even Justice Sotomayor doesn't make this observation. You need to come to Daily Kos and have David Neer make this observation for you. So again, the value of blogging and social media bringing all sorts of expertise to the fore. This is a very good point. 6 weeks ago, the Supreme Court blocked a lower federal court ruling ordering Alabama to redraw its congressional maps in order to create a second black congressional district, as mandated by the VRA, which just makes the whole thing even more bizarre. Remember, we just said that the Supreme Court made this decision in Wisconsin's case, saying that creating an additional black majority district would violate the Voting Rights Act. We also find that 6 weeks ago they said, oh no, the Voting Rights Act actually mandates the creation of a second black congressional district, but we're going to block you from actually complying with the Voting Rights Act in this case. So down in Alabama, where they're trying to comply with the Voting Rights Act, you can't do that. In Wisconsin, where they're trying to comply with the Voting Rights Act, you can't do that, and in fact, you got it so wrong that you violated the Voting Rights Act. Wow. Justice Brett Kavanaugh explained back in the Alabama case, in a concurring opinion, that the lower court's order had come too close to the election for the state to revise its existing map, which had only a single district with a black majority. Now, it's late March, yet the Supreme Court nevertheless sees fit to send Wisconsin back to the drawing board. There's simply no reason for the differing outcomes. That's it. They are what they are. They're gimmitarian decisions. There's no explanation for why it was too late to do this to Alabama in early February, but okay, and plenty of time to do this to Wisconsin in late March, except that both things come out the way Republican operatives wanted them to. That's the only thread that ties them. So, as David puts it right, there's no difference, no reason for the differing outcomes. The original lower court ruling in Alabama came down 4 months before the state's primary, while the Wisconsin Supreme Court's decision was issued just 5 months ahead of the primary there. Well, no reason but one, of course. Both Supreme Court decisions undermine the cause of black representation and in so doing benefit the GOP. The fact that they are completely at odds with one another is just further proof that the Supreme Court is dominated not merely by conservative ideologues, but Republicans in robes. And that's the bottom line of it. And I thought an important important piece of the puzzle that I guess wasn't addressed in the actual dissent. So, well worth our time on it. Now, let's see. There's more to this, and I got to make sure of which one of these tweets that are parked in Pocket it actually is. Here we go. From Election Law Blog. I have to follow it to the original piece here. Here's Rick Hasen expounding his full opinion on this stuff. We've heard his name mentioned twice during the show with little snippets of what he had to say and a little bit more detail here, but not a whole lot. We can move on to other things after this. When it was breaking news yesterday at 9:49 a.m., he reported, breaking, Supreme Court, in bizarre unsigned opinion, strikes Wisconsin legislative maps on voting rights grounds, signaling new hostility to the Voting Rights Act. In a per curiam, that is unsigned, opinion on the shadow docket, over the dissent of Justices Kagan and Sotomayor, the Supreme Court has rejected a redistricting plan that a divided Wisconsin Supreme Court had adopted for drawing state assembly and Senate districts. I am on my way to teach, says Rick at this point, and so I have time for just a brief analysis here. He's probably late to the class, but you got to get there before 15 minutes, right? Or else all the students are allowed to leave. That was always the rumor. Anyway, but the way this case was handled is quite bizarre and is another signal of a conservative supermajority of the Supreme Court showing increasing hostility to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And basically, really honestly, just showing increasing hostility to being bound by any rules of judicial canon or construction whatsoever. Just total gimmitarianism. The majority decision essentially says this: there was an impasse between the Democratic governor and the Republican legislature over drawing district lines. So the court had to draw lines in the first instance. That is, they couldn't come to an agreement as between the Republican legislature and the Democratic governor. And so the court said, we'll draw the lines. It set forth criteria which essentially said that parties should propose maps that make the least change from the maps of the last decade. That's a pretty conservative approach to things, right? The court, I'm sure this was disturbing to the Supreme Court of the United States to have the Wisconsin state court say, all right, well, we'll draw the lines. But, that would be disturbing to, conservatives who say this is really the job of the legislature and they got to get their plan past the governor, but it's a legislative job. You can't have judges legislating from the bench. So, but, the problem is that I think they learned their lesson from Ohio, where they too are under orders to produce as neutral a map as possible by order of the state constitution. And the Republicans on the commission there just simply refuse to comply with that rule and just keep handing back gerrymandered, overloaded Republican maps and say, we're just not going to draw a fair one. So either take it or leave it. So probably with that in mind, Wisconsin says, well, the courts will draw it. And although this is kind of a weird departure, and maybe it's contemplated under Wisconsin law, I guess it must be, they said, even so, despite the fact that we're going to draw the maps, the best we can do for you is we'll do it as conservatively as possible, starting by saying, well, the two parties here should submit maps for our consideration, as opposed to our starting from scratch and drawing them ourselves. That's not something that we're used to doing and not something that we're willing to do, and would be an even greater departure from usual practice. But the usual players will be involved in making suggestions. And while we're at it, we suggest to you that we will judge your proposals, of course, based on how they comport with the Voting Rights Act and basic fairness. But also, we will prefer maps that make the fewest changes from the old maps, the previous maps, which were the last ones successfully drawn by those good folks in the legislature. The right people did the job, and the closer you hew to what they did, the more comfortable we'll be in ordering that that these new maps be approved, even though the legislature wasn't the one that drew them. It's based on the ones that they did draw and proposed to us by people who are, I guess, probably in the legislature now, or at least in elective politics as opposed to being on the bench. All right, so the majority decision is essentially, right, an impasse between the parties. The court will draw the lines, setting forth criteria, which essentially said the parties should propose maps that make the least change, right? The court adopted the governor's maps, the governor's proposal, and those maps, he's the Democrat there, those maps added another majority-minority district around Milwaukee. The governor added this district, saying it was required by the Voting Rights Act because the failure to draw the district would violate Section 2 of the VRA. When the state Supreme Court said, yes, great, and adopted the governor's maps, in other words, when the state Supreme Court chose the Democratic proposal over the Republican proposal, it left open the possibility that they could be challenged later as violating the Voting Rights Act, or as an unconstitutional racial gerrymander, a Shaw claim, as it's put here, named after the case, violating the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. There was no full airing of either issue in this fast-track litigation to draw the district lines. The Supreme Court's opinion today says either the governor or the Supreme Court of Wisconsin misapplied the United States Supreme Court's Voting Rights Act and racial gerrymandering precedents, in part by elevating just one of the GRA's, I don't know this case name, but Gingles, Gingles, I guess. Oh boy, it could be pronounced in any number of ways, but that's the lawyer's lingo, right? You talk about a test laid out by the court, or criteria laid out by a court in a certain case by referring to it that way. If it's Smith versus the United States, and they come up with a thing that says, all right, from now on, this is how we will evaluate proposals under this precedent, blah, blah, blah. They have to have these three things. Then it becomes the Smith test or the Smith factors. This is the Gingles factors. What are they? Well, I don't know what they all are, but one of them, it says here, was violated. The Supreme Court's opinion says that either the governor or the Wisconsin court misapplied the U.S. Supreme Court's Voting Rights Act and racial gerrymandering precedents, in part by elevating just one of the VRA Gingles factors, that being proportionality. It said that the VRA should be read in light of the racial gerrymandering cases and require the drawing of a majority-minority district only when a certain kind of strict scrutiny analysis is applied. The state Supreme Court should have considered under strict scrutiny whether a race-neutral alternative that did not add a seventh majority black district would deny black voters equal political opportunity. This ruling is bizarre on many levels, all canvassed by the dissenting opinion, except the one that they didn't canvass, which David Neer did, which is that the timing makes no sense. The state Supreme Court did not purport to do a full VRA analysis. It was adopting maps, and those maps could have been challenged later on VRA or equal protection grounds. In reaching this decision, the Supreme Court majority resolved some uncertain issues of statutory and constitutional interpretation, which they would ordinarily have done through a full hearing, but they didn't. The court did so on skimpy briefing with no oral argument or a chance to fully consider the issues, treating the stay request as a cert petition and deciding the full case on the merits. And on, at least on my first quick look, the court's substantive resolution of these issues even further narrows the scope of Section 2 of the VRA, making it harder for plaintiffs to win such cases. So, to sum up, this is a very dense piece actually, short but dense. To sum up, the court used a case in an emergency procedural posture to reach out and decide an issue that could have waited for full briefing and argument either in a lower court, in a challenge to the maps, or if the Supreme Court had set the case for argument. It decided these issues in ways hostile to minority voting rights without giving a full opportunity for airing out the issues and pointing out how this will further hurt voters of color. It continues to chip away at the Voting Rights Act without acknowledging that it is killing off the last major protection for minority voters from discriminatory districting plans. It's not looking good out there, is basically what they're saying. So, all right, that was, as I said, a little denser than I was hoping for, but I think if you go to the election law blog, you're in for it. But that's where they'll at least raise some of the critical issues that you might not read about elsewhere. But here, David did it even before we got to election law blog. All right, let's race around randomly and pick up on the rest of the stories being circulated and discussed out there today. One landing in my email, just giving you a brief update from my little corner of the world, and it probably compares with yours as well. I've been watching the New York Times coronavirus tracker emails for Loudoun County, Virginia. Today's report, the average number of new cases in Loudoun County reached 109 yesterday, a 10% increase from the day before. And, things are basically inching back up is the bad news. And they seem to be racking up a couple days in a row now of percentage-wise, double-digit increases in the number of cases day to day, even as our vaccine numbers remain pretty high. Let's see if I can click on the local maps and charts and see if... look, the uptick isn't big. It doesn't look big on the chart because it's sitting right next to the Omicron spike, and that, changed the scale of things and dwarfed everything else. But I guess I'll put it this way. There's this enormous spike wherein at the peak we were registering 885 cases a day in January of this year. January 12th was like the peak thing. Oh, that was the daily average. And I guess the daily high there was 928. We're now talking about 109, so significantly less than that. But by the same token, let's see, 109 as the daily average. Okay. I see. I keep mistaking it from, the raw number versus the daily average. But the daily average number of cases we're doing now is 109. New cases yesterday, in fact, in raw numbers, was 234. And, where does that put us? The last time prior to the Omicron spike that we saw 234 new cases in a day was the peak of the January 2021 spike, which I guess was Delta. Was that Delta spike? And just after all of the Virginians had gone on to the insurrection at the Capitol and given each other coronavirus there, and then came back and brought it back to their hometowns. That's the other biggest spike that we've got. So, it's a little worrisome. Now, granted, that was several days in a row, so that we were doing a daily average of 324 cases then, and we're just doing 109 now. So it's 1/3 lower than that. But on a daily basis, if the trend continues, we're looking at something more akin to that. Was that Delta way back then? But we're looking at something that is liable to grow into what was, prior to Omicron, the biggest spike Virginia had in the entirety of the pandemic, January 2021. So we'll be on the lookout. And at least, the good news is far more people are protected from serious illness by vaccination now than was the case in January of 2021. But it looks to me like we're watching a wave form again, and whether it'll become a spike as big as Omicron, I guess I tend to doubt it, but it could be a spike as big as Delta, and I'd rather not have that. All right, jumping around still further from one corner of the news gathering world to another. I thought this was of interest too, and it came to mind when Greg was mentioning, what were we talking about? Oh, yes, when we were talking about the Wisconsin case and how weird it was that the Supreme Court was making this, had decided in February it was too late to redraw lines, but now it being late March, it's fine for them to redraw lines just so long as the outcome is good for Republicans. And also the Supreme Court confirmation hearings going on, and reminded me of the attempt at drawing the new rule back when Merrick Garland was the nominee under in the last year of the Obama term, and McConnell making up the rule that you can't, that there shouldn't be any nominations to the Supreme Court in an election year. And now they have a new rule, I guess, because now it's a Democratic president nominating a Supreme Court justice, and it's not an election year, so they need a new rule for disallowing and delegitimizing a Democratic president's nomination. And so I guess it has fallen to Laura Ingraham to come up with that, and so she did the best she could, I guess, on short notice. Laura Ingraham, it's noted here in this clip from ACYN, ACYN, the Twitter feed we keep mentioning, who does all this great video work, has the screen grab from, or, the clip from Laura Ingraham's show. She says now that senators who vote to confirm a Supreme Court justice while the president has a low approval rating are violating their sacred duty, the Senate's oath of office. She's got up in the background here as though that had anything to do with anything. But that's an interesting new twist, right? So now no Supreme Court nominations allowed in an election year, even if it's a full year before the election, and no Supreme Court nominations, at least by Democrats, when your approval rating is low. No word on how low is too low, but I'm sure that's subject to change too, based on who the president is and what party they're from. Wow. Okay, the other big news of the day, I think, maybe we'll save that one for the next segment, because it probably requires a little bit more reading than the rest of the stuff, and I'll stick with one of the small pieces, but we'll get to it eventually. Everybody, I think, talking about the word from the now resigned prosecutors from the Manhattan DA's office about their dissatisfaction over the decision by the Manhattan DA to decline to pursue criminal charges against Donald Trump for his, mostly for his tax schemes and his mental gymnastics, if that's what you can call it, revaluing property at a whim, boosting its value when he's trying to catch a loan against it, talking down its value when it comes time for taxation on it. And at any rate, you would have heard the other day, we all talked about it, I think, their decision not to pursue the case. Now the specialist prosecutors who were brought in for the purpose of bringing this case have resigned and are speaking out about how dissatisfied they are with the decision. But first, because we have a little less time before the break than I was hoping for, this small bit of news tweeted by Gabriel Malor, I don't know where he puts the emphasis in here, fun random dude pointing out for the rest of us that Alex Jones is still in court and is I forget what's he in court for now. Yes, it's still the Sandy Hook story, their defamation suit, but apparently he was scheduled for another deposition in the suit, and it says here that Alex Jones sent a lawyer with a dodgy doctor's note saying that he couldn't leave the house for a deposition in the Sandy Hook family's defamation suit. And then, I'm too ill, I can't leave, right? But then the judge catches him hosting the show, doing the InfoWars show from his non-home studio during the hearing. Like, I can't go anywhere. The doctor says I'm too sick, and he just turns on the live stream, and they're doing the show. That ain't right. And it's going to, I assume that'll probably hurt him in his case. The Independent, the UK paper, was doing the reporting here, and but they're usually behind a paywall, so I can just read you this news from Gabriel himself, who, I don't know whether maybe he wrote the piece, in which case it's fine, but he's read it and summarizing it by saying, so if you're a Jones lawyer, how do you ever show your face in that court again? And the answer is, if you're Alex Jones's lawyer, that stuff probably doesn't bother you. But At any rate, they'll have to go back. And Gabriel says, I would change my name and move to another country. Anyway, Jones has been ordered to appear for the deposition tomorrow, which I guess is today now. So stay tuned for part 2 of this farce, and we'll see what they come up with. But I guess that's just the thing. That's the way Alex Jones plays it. He says, let's see if they have the authority to drag me into this deposition. I don't think they do, so I'll just play hooky until we find out different. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I just discovered that there's a little bit more information out there about the Wisconsin case, but I might just leave it at this point after just giving you the basic rundown. Mark Joseph Stern, who was mentioned earlier in the roundup, tweeting about this, and some interesting developments in that, I guess. But just his view of it. This is an absolutely shocking decision. The maps were adopted by a Republican justice on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. This appeal was considered a Hail Mary, and it prevailed. I am stunned by this ruling. He's pointing here and includes the tweet of Steve Vladek, whose name we call all the time here, writing, SCOTUS uses shadow docket to summarily throw out Wisconsin Supreme Court ruling adopting Governor Evers' redistricting maps. Sotomayor and Kagan publicly dissent. Stern continues by saying, if anything, Sotomayor's dissent undersells just how unprecedented this decision is. It appears to dramatically alter the law of redistricting to make it much harder for states to draw majority black districts, all through a cryptic shadow docket ruling. Sotomayor's dissent is excerpted here, saying the court's action today is unprecedented. In an emergency posture, the court summarily overturns a Wisconsin Supreme Court decision resolving a conflict over the state's redistricting, a decision rendered after a 5-month process involving all interested stakeholders. Despite the fact that summary reversals are generally reserved for decisions in violation of settled law, the court today faults the state Supreme Court for its failure to comply with an obligation that under existing precedent is hazy at best. In other words, they should have taken this case and really aired it out. Stern concludes, there is literally no discussion of the Purcell principle, right? I think Greg mentioned this one, in the unsigned majority opinion, even though the majority has repeatedly used Purcell to prevent federal courts from altering election laws shortly before an election, which is what the majority just did. Now, what I thought was an interesting development here was that somebody then chimes in and says, well, listen to Mark Elias. He's the guy, right? The rest are armchair QBs. Never heard of Vladek before until I saw this tweet, which really should be an indication that this isn't a serious observer of election law or any other law, that you never heard of Mark Vladek, but you have heard of Mark Elias, okay, maybe. But the tweet he includes here seems to point in the other direction. Mark Elias tweeting, breaking, Supreme Court rejects Republican effort to block Wisconsin congressional map. SCOTUS sends state legislative maps back to state Supreme Court. So you wonder, What are we talking about? It's not. It's like the opposite sounding read. And if you click on it, there's the tweet from March 23rd, but then it's linked to an earlier piece on the case itself. How much earlier? August 22nd, 2021. The Wisconsin Redistricting Challenge. And, I mean, while it may be the same case, you wonder how up-to-date is that information. But if you go to Mark Elias's blog, Democracy Docket, the latest on the case that he's actually posted just yesterday, as would be expected, says U.S. Supreme Court throws out Wisconsin's legislative maps and appears to, come back in line with everybody else's take on this stuff. So it's kind of interesting that got plucked out of nowhere, but it was a tweet from just the other day, but pointing back to a really old piece about the case when it was in a different posture entirely. The current piece just says pretty much the same thing as everybody else. So I'm curious about who is this dude saying, no, listen to Mark Elias. Doesn't matter, because if you scroll down a little further, somebody else says, well, here's Mark Elias's current tweeting on it. Maybe someone who actually understands this stuff should weigh in, like Mark Elias maybe. And here's Elias's other tweet. This news is somehow in paragraph 15. In a second unsigned order on Wednesday without noted dissents, the court rejected a separate emergency application concerning Wisconsin's congressional districts. Shorter, GOP lost its congressional challenge. Okay, all right. So we're talking about one map for state legislative districts and one map for U.S., House of Representatives districts in Wisconsin. So I guess mixed news, perhaps, as between what happened on the state level and what happens on the federal level in Wisconsin. What's happening here? It's a piece attached from the New York Times, also dated yesterday. Supreme Court sides with Republicans in Wisconsin redistricting. Okay, and so there I guess they're talking about the state legislature maps. What's the story in, what did he say, paragraph 15? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That doesn't look like the same paragraph 15. So it's something screwy going on with the way that Mark Elias is looking at things. What news is in 15? The second unsigned order on Wednesday. How come I didn't see that in this? Where's the second order? Am I counting the paragraphs incorrectly? Is that what's going on? I don't know. All right. Well, we'll see if I can straighten that one out by Monday. But I guess it's entirely possible that there could be two parallel situations going on. I mean, it seems obvious that there are definitely two different maps, and it might be that Republicans had a setback on the congressional map and made huge gains, though, on the state legislative maps. All right. Well, I want to jump out of this category, although maybe we'll come back to it if we're finding that we have space at the end of the show for it. But I doubt it. Well, this one will require some digestion off the air. Instead, we'll go to a different New York Times piece, the one I teased you with before. Trump is guilty of, quote, numerous felonies. Prosecutor who resigned says. Mark F. Pomerantz, who had investigated the former president, left after the Manhattan District Attorney, the new one, Alvin Bragg, halted an effort to seek an indictment. And this one has everybody up in arms because his predecessor, Cy Vance Jr., famously declined to prosecute Trump in early days, but then had a big reversal as he decided not to seek re-election and put Pomerantz and another outside expert brought in for the purpose on the case of investigating Trump and made all the noises necessary to start bringing criminal charges. And then his successor, also a Democrat and elected in Manhattan, Alvin Bragg, comes in, making it sound like he'll continue the effort now that Vance is out of office, but he'll continue with the effort to prosecute Trump, and then makes a sudden reversal. And everybody's wondering just why. William K. Rashbaum, Ben Protest, and Jonah Bromwich reporting for New York Times on this. One of the senior Manhattan prosecutors who investigated Donald Trump believed that the former president was, quote, guilty of numerous felony violations, and that it was, quote, a grave failure of justice not to hold him accountable, according to a copy of his resignation letter. Sounds like something we might say. The prosecutor, Mark F. Pomerantz, submitted his resignation last month after the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, abruptly stopped pursuing an indictment of Mr. Trump. Mr. Pomerantz, 70, a prominent former federal prosecutor and white-collar defense lawyer who came out of retirement to work on the Trump investigation, resigned on the same day as Carrie R. Dunn, another senior prosecutor leading the inquiry. Mr. Pomerantz's February 23rd letter, obtained by the New York Times, offers a personal account of his decision to resign and for the first time states explicitly his belief that the office could have convicted the former president. Mr. Bragg's decision was, quote, contrary to the public interest, he wrote. The team that has been investigating Mr. Trump harbors no doubt about whether he committed crimes. He did, Mr. Pomerantz wrote. Mr. Pomerantz and Mr. Dunn planned to charge Mr. Trump with falsifying business records, specifically his annual financial statements, a felony in New York State. Mr. Bragg's decision not to pursue charges then, and the resignations that followed, threw the fate of the long-running investigation into serious doubt. Threw it in a garbage can is where it threw it. If the prosecutors had secured an indictment of Mr. Trump, it would have been the highest profile case ever brought by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and would have made Mr. Trump the first American president to face criminal charges. Earlier this month, the Times reported that the investigation unraveled after weeks of escalating disagreement between the veteran prosecutors overseeing the case and the new district attorney. That story of how it unraveled, I think, is still sitting in pocket, waiting to be read on the air one day, but events have overtaken us. Much of the debate, it's linked in here, too, if you want to go back and take a look. Much of the debate centered on whether the prosecutors could prove that Mr. Trump knowingly falsified the value of his assets on an annual financial statements. The Times found a necessary element to proving the case, and the one that worries lots of people, like my dad, for instance. While Mr. Dunn, although, in a different context, but again, proving the elements of the case is always, that's the bottom line. That's what you have to do as a prosecutor for anything. But when it's tricky and Trump talks in code and he tries to avoid saying the magic words that will incriminate him, it makes things difficult. This is the same issue that we see in prosecuting over January 6th as well. That's what my dad's worried about, that acquitting him there for failure to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he did incite this riot and did intend to defraud the United States will leave him saying he's vindicated. Of course, as I say, a conviction would leave him saying he was vindicated. It doesn't matter. Anyway, while Mr. Dunn and Mr. Pomerantz were confident that the office could demonstrate that the former president had intended to inflate the value of his golf clubs, hotels, and office buildings, Mr. Bragg was not. Could it be an honest difference of opinion? Well, we'll see. He balked at pursuing an indictment against Mr. Trump, a decision that shut down Mr. Pomerantz and Mr. Dunn's presentation of evidence to a grand jury and prompted their resignations. Mr. Bragg has said that his office continues to conduct the investigation. For that reason, Mr. Bragg, a former federal prosecutor and deputy New York State Attorney General who became district attorney in January, is barred from commenting on its specifics. We're totally doing it, I just can't tell you anything about it. Mr. Bragg's predecessor, Cyrus R. Vance Jr., had decided in his final days in office to move toward an indictment, leaving Mr. Trump just weeks away from likely criminal charges. And everybody was rubbing their hands together. That's what, there you go. We were doing that. Mr. Bragg's decision seems, for now at least, to have removed one of the greatest legal threats Mr. Trump has ever faced. The resignation letter cast a harsh light on that decision from the perspective of Mr. Pomerantz, who wrote that he believed there was enough evidence to prove Mr. Trump's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what you have to do. No case is perfect, Mr. Pomerantz wrote. Whatever the risks of bringing the case may be, I am convinced that a failure to prosecute will pose much greater risks in terms of public confidence in the fair administration of justice. I think we might all agree with that. In a statement responding to the letter, Mr. Trump's lawyer, Ronald P. Fischetti, said that the charges were not warranted and that Mr. Pomerantz had the opportunity to present the fruits of his investigation to the DA and his senior staff on several occasions and failed. I don't know if that's actually true, but that's what he says. Mr. Fischetti, who was, in fact, Mr. Pomerantz's law partner in the 1980s and early 1990s, added, "We should applaud District Attorney Alvin Bragg for adhering to the rule of law and sticking to the evidence while making an apolitical charging decision based solely on the lack of evidence and nothing else." In his own statement, Mr. Trump's company, the Trump Organization, called Mr. Pomerantz a never-Trumper and said, never before have we seen this level of corruption in our legal system. He has to do it that way. His lawyer says, look, he made the absolute right call, a totally apolitical balancing test of whether or not he thought he could prove the elements of the crime. He decided it was too much of a risk and didn't do it. We applaud him for upholding the rule of law. You can't just bring charges against people that you can't prove. I mean, that's his opinion of it, but that's the way a lawyer handles it. Trump has to say he's a liar and a scumbag and corruption never before seen and yada yada. Mr. Trump has long denied wrongdoing and leveled personal attacks on the people investigating him, including a thinly veiled reference to Mr. Pomerantz. In one statement, he claimed that lawyers from Mr. Pomerantz's former law firm had, quote, gone to work in the district attorney's office in order to viciously make sure that the job gets done. No one even knows what that means. Mr. Pomerantz, who confirmed his resignation in a brief interview last month, declined to comment on the letter when contacted by the Times this week. A spokeswoman for Mr. Bragg, Danielle Filson, said that the investigation was continuing and added, a team of experienced prosecutors is working every day to follow the facts and the law. There is nothing more we can or should say at this juncture about an ongoing investigation. In his letter, Mr. Pomerantz acknowledged that Mr. Bragg, quote, devoted significant time and energy to understanding the evidence in the inquiry and had made his decision in good faith, but he wrote, quote, a decision made in good faith may nevertheless be wrong. And that's true. Mr. Pomerantz contrasted Mr. Bragg's approach with that of Mr. Vance, who made the Trump investigation a centerpiece of his tenure and convened the grand jury last fall. Mr. Pomerantz's letter said that shortly before leaving office, Mr. Vance had directed the prosecutors to pursue an indictment of Mr. Trump as well as, quote, other defendants as soon as reasonably possible. The letter did not name the other defendants, but recent Times articles reported that prosecutors envisioned also charging Mr. Trump's family business and his longtime chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, who had already been indicted along with the company last year, accused of a years-long scheme to evade taxes. Mr. Bragg has told his aides that the inquiry could move forward if a new piece of evidence is unearthed, or if a Trump Organization insider decides to turn on Mr. Trump. Some investigators in the office saw either possibility as highly unlikely. There are always additional facts to be pursued, Mr. Pomerantz wrote in his letter, but the investigative team that has been working on this matter for many months does not believe that it makes law enforcement sense to postpone a prosecution in the hope that additional evidence will somehow emerge. He added that I and others believe that your decision not to authorize prosecution now will doom any future prospects that Mr. Trump will be prosecuted for the criminal conduct we have been investigating. As of late December, the team investigating Mr. Trump was mostly united around Mr. Vance's decision to pursue charges. But that had not always been the case, the Times reported this month. Last year, 3 career prosecutors in the district attorney's office opted to leave the team, uncomfortable with the speed at which it was proceeding and with what they believed were gaps in the evidence. Initially, Mr. Pomerantz and Mr. Dunn had envisioned charging Mr. Trump with the crime of scheme to defraud, believing that he falsely inflated his assets on the statements of financial condition that had been used to obtain bank loans. But by the end of the year, they had changed course and planned to charge Mr. Trump with falsifying business records, a simpler case that essentially amounted to painting Mr. Trump as a liar rather than a thief. Mr. Pomerantz, who joined the investigation more than a year ago, said in a letter that Mr. Trump's financial statements were, quote, false, that he had lied about his assets to banks, the national media, counterparties, and many others, including the American people. Mr. Pomerantz is not the only one involved in the investigation to suggest that Mr. Trump or his company broke the law. The New York Attorney General, Letitia James, whose office is assisting the criminal investigation and conducting its own civil inquiry, has filed court papers in the civil matter, arguing that she has evidence showing that the Trump organization had engaged in, quote, fraudulent or misleading practices. Mr. Trump has accused Mr. Bragg and Ms. James, both of whom are black Democrats, of carrying out a politically motivated witch hunt and, of course, of being racists. Aren't they the real racists? Ms. James's inquiry, which can lead to a lawsuit but not criminal charges, continues as she seeks to question Trump and 2 of his adult children under oath. The Trumps recently appealed the judge's order that they submit to Ms. James's questioning. In another court filing, Ms. James disclosed that Mr. Trump's longtime accounting firm, Mazars USA, had cut ties with him and essentially retracted a decade's worth of his financial statements, which is why, it looked like they had a good case in Manhattan. Mazars was shaping up to be a crucial witness in the criminal investigation as well. In January, Mr. Pomerantz questioned Mr. Trump's accountant at Mazars before the grand jury, zeroing in on exaggerations in the financial statements. But the statements also contained disclaimers, including acknowledgments that Mazars had neither audited nor authenticated Mr. Trump's claims, potentially complicating the case. And some of Mr. Bragg's supporters have argued that it would have been a difficult case to win. Still, Mr. Pomerantz wrote that he and other prosecutors believed that they had amassed sufficient evidence to establish the former president's guilt, writing that, quote, "We believe that the prosecution would prevail if charges were brought and the matter were tried to an impartial jury." Addressing an apparent belief in Mr. Bragg's office that they might lose at trial, Mr. Pomerantz wrote, quote, "Respect for the rule of law and the need to reinforce the bedrock proposition that no man is above the law require that this prosecution be brought even if a conviction is not certain." Mr. Pomerantz is a former head of the criminal division in the United States Attorney's Office in Manhattan, as well as a longtime defense lawyer. He worked on the Trump investigation pro bono. Mr. Dunn, at the time, was serving as Mr. Vance's general counsel, a job that he had held since early 2017. In that role, he had successfully argued before the Supreme Court, winning access to Mr. Trump's tax records. Mr. Dunn himself, for the purposes of this article, declined to comment. So that's where we stand. Some inside information kind of leaking out about how people felt about the decision-making anyway. It's still, a roll of the dice to guess how the case might have gone. All right, let's see. Well, we covered the Clarence Thomas situation, but just putting on the record here that the Supreme Court press office continues to decline to discuss whether or not Clarence Thomas is actually still in the hospital. There was the tweeted report that Stephen Breyer was saying that, I don't think he commented on whether he was in or out of the hospital, but it said, yeah, he'll be fine. It looks like he's in no particular danger, I guess. That is to say, the danger of dying, which is what everybody is suddenly thinking about. But I don't know. I mean, he's not a doctor, but at any rate, the court is staying mum on this. In another weird story that I guess we should probably bring up in the last couple minutes of the show here, a weird Associated Press story. As it happens, I have the Toronto Star's version of the AP story, so it probably has all the words spelled wrong in it. Something I don't know what to make of. Trump aide Manafort, Paul Manafort, back in the news, removed from a plane for a revoked passport. Apparently, well, read you the story, but he was on his way to Dubai for unknown reasons. Like, I don't know whether he was absconding with a fortune or what, but basically he said he's been trying to, now that he's pardoned or partially, what did he get? Some partial commutation of his sentences or some of the sentences. Plus he was released from prison early because the coronavirus concerns, et cetera, et cetera. And still, none of these reports have made it clear whether there was an earlier adjudication of his passport and revoked it because either he was a flight risk or a felon or what, I don't know. Or whether it was a spot decision to invalidate the passport as he was making the attempt to leave the country. But it's weird news either way. Former Trump advisor Paul Manafort was removed from a plane at Miami International Airport before it took off for Dubai because he carried a revoked passport, officials said Wednesday. Miami-Dade police detective Alvaro Zabaleta confirmed that Manafort was removed from the Emirates airline flight without incident Sunday night, but directed further questions to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency, Bureau, whatever they call themselves these days. That agency, did not immediately respond to an email Wednesday seeking comment. I wonder if there's comment now. A lawyer who has represented Manafort did not immediately return a call and an email seeking comment on Wednesday. Manafort, 72, led former President Donald Trump's campaign for several months during the 2016 presidential race, but was ousted in August of that year after revelations about his business dealings in Ukraine. Ukraine? What? Yeah. He was later indicted on a broad array of financial crimes as part of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into ties between the Trump campaign and Russia. He was convicted by a jury in August of 2018, later pleaded guilty in federal court in Washington. What? Convicted by a jury on something else, I guess. I don't know. He was probably in court several times, but convicted by a jury in August of 2018, and I guess on some later counts also pleaded guilty and didn't need a jury trial. In May of 2020, Manafort was released from a low-security prison where he was serving a more than 7-year federal sentence amid concerns about the coronavirus. Although Manafort had not served long enough to be eligible for release under the usual guidelines, the Bureau of Prisons decided to free him because of his age and health vulnerabilities, a person familiar with the matter has said. Trump pardoned Manafort in December of 2020. Manafort's removal was first reported by the website is that K News or News like a new, K-N-E-W, with a Z on the end, like I knew about the news. News.com. And I don't know who the hell they are, but, an acknowledgement from the AP on that one. Let me see whether there's new news on Manafort and whether they have cleared up what was the deal with the passport and when was it revoked. Because while it seems to me that it might have been the case that in his legal proceedings he got his passport invalidated, then it's a question of, well, what makes you think you could just get onto an international flight and leave? Did he know, in other words, that his passport had been revoked? Or did the fact that he had checked in for an international flight to someplace like Dubai trigger an alarm somewhere in border control, and then they wanted to get him in? I don't think anybody has any newer news on it. CNN's report here is from 19 hours ago, and it looks to be mirror or maybe even just based entirely on the AP report. So I don't know. That's a mystery to be unraveled. And, it's time now to start wondering, I guess, whether or not Justice Putnam will unravel that mystery during his show. His U.S. passport was revoked and he could not take the flight, according according to the airport and folks and the Customs and Border Protection people. Not much more information about it, but lots more information about him in the CNN piece. Still, I don't know. And reports over the last couple of days, I think Marcy Wheeler noting that he and Roger Stone were back together and hanging out before his flight out of town on Emirates Airlines, and maybe that had something to do with what was going on. I don't know. Anyway, keeping an eye on that and checking out for the week. I do have, and I think I will be able to complete for you successfully, the pre-recorded show for tomorrow. Lots of interesting things to dive into. I hope you will enjoy it in my absence. We'll be back live on Monday. And for now, Justice Putnam comes next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's dive in and see what he's got in store for you. I was going to say store, but that's not the word. The GOP treated Judge Jackson's confirmation hearing like a campaign fundraiser, that we saw. Elsewhere, the Biden administration announced an initiative to address racial bias in home appraisals. Republicans made sure the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit got no funds to enforce sanctions on rich Russians.
NetworksRadio.com.
We're going to need those, too.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Of course, a note on Madeleine Albright, and internationally, the Russian stock market will partially reopen for limited trading. How interesting is that? And the Taliban broke their promise. Oh, man. Or on higher education for Afghan girls. I guess a little surprise there from the Taliban. We'll see you live again next week.